Hello, class. Professor Suarez bringing you class number 2. Uh, Very excited to talk about some of the things that we went over in the past couple of weeks and try to tie a couple of subjects together for you guys. So let's go ahead and get started. So just some spring cleaning and general announcements. So I noticed that some of the students haven't been posting the discussion board, and that's not really a good idea because the discussion board does encompass 40% of your grade. So if you are looking to pass the class, it's very important that you continue posting and answering some of the questions to the videos that are posted up. Also, I want to invite that you guys post a little bit more than a couple of sentences because again, yes, it's for a grade, but it's also for you to evaluate the information that's going on here. Because frankly, if you don't post anything or if you don't write a substantial amount or think about what's really being discussed, you're not going to internalize the subject material and apply it. Again, this is personal finance, so it's in your best interest to learn the material and make it your own. The second piece is I noticed that some of the students also haven't been doing the quizzes. This is also a bad idea because it's a part of your final grade, and you want to make sure that at least you do it. I mean, frankly, if you get a 0 on it, that's going to bring down your average substantially. But if you at least attempt it and you discuss with me that there were some questions you didn't understand or you weren't able to answer, I could look to see if there's something I could do and figure out why you had difficulty with the question. I had some students who already told me that some of the questions had trick answers to them, and I'm reviewing it now to make sure that the quizzes are fair and just. Because frankly, all the quizzes are based on what's on the book. So if you read the chapter and you go over some of the key materials, you should be fine. With that being said, I do want to invite any conversation that you may have, whether it's about the subject material, the way the class is going, or any questions that you have in general. My number and my email are on the website. And take advantage of that. Shoot me a text, give me a call. I'm available throughout the week, and I am willing to make time for any student who's interested in getting a good grade in the class. Okay. So as far as what we discussed previously, we covered different subjects: income, budget, goals. But the last aspects that we were discussing, or the last aspects that were highlighting in the previous weeks, was credit and spending. On the video about credit, they spoke about the 3 C's that encompass what credit really is. And they had a point where they were discussing what you would need to determine how much credit you would be willing to take on or how much credit you would be able to afford. And they said that the way you would do that is by reviewing your budget, how much you spend, and your discretionary income would be the number that you would use to figure that out. Now, how do you get to discretionary income? I want to highlight those steps for you guys here today. So planning an effective budget, right? There's 6 steps that's highlighted in the book. The first step is to set financial goals. So what you're going to be doing is considering exactly what you want to accomplish as far as your finances and outline that and write that out. The second step is estimating your income. Now, we discussed before that your income is affected by the amount of time that you work, and also you have to evaluate the time that you allocate towards training yourself and investing in yourself, so that way you could be more viable as an employee as well as more valuable to a company, right? And then we showed the chart that outlined how wages are impacted by your capacity and your learning and what have you, right? So estimating your income for this year and perhaps even in the future is the second step in determining how you're going to approach getting to those goals. The third step is setting aside a budget based on that income for emergency and savings. So this could be 20% of whatever revenue you're making or any money that you're making, 10%. It's just a portion that you set aside for emergency and also for saving for future costs, whether it's health or hospital bills, or even a future car if you're looking to save for something like that. These are all outlined in the financial goals that you have. So the costs and how you want to approach that would be outlined through each of the steps. The fourth step is budgeting fixed expenses. Now, fixed expenses are your bills, rent, phone bills, anything that you have that you know the exact cost. Every month you're going to be getting the same bill, so it's not like it's an expense that you can't plan for. By setting aside this money for those things, you could then go into step 5, budgeting for variable expenses. Now, this could be gas, this could be food, this could be groceries, things that tend to change week to week, depending on the circumstances. So you want to allocate an amount of money towards that. And then the last step is really recording your spending amounts. Now, what you'll notice is when you actually record the amounts that you're spending, you become aware of your spending habits. And if there's things that you want to change or become more disciplined with that, at that point you'd be able to do it a lot more effectively versus just spending your money left and right. Now, all these steps come together to really help you to evaluate what is your discretionary income. What's the amount that, after all these steps are taken into account, after you've established the budget, your emergency fund and savings, your fixed costs, and then your variable costs, what's left for you to be able to do other stuff, have fun, or in the case of credit, really determine how much you have to pay towards a credit expense. Now, some of the uses and misuses of credit are immense as far as how many times people get into situations where they overuse their credit cards, and in other cases where people use it to their advantage and build credit so that way they could take out mortgages, take out auto loans, or get financing for things that they normally wouldn't be able to afford under normal circumstances, right? So for you want to, if you're looking to see if the way you're using credit is being misused or misguided, there's 3 questions that you could always ask yourself that help to put things in perspective. The first question is, do I have the cash I need for the down payment or to pay for the credit that I'm using, right? And what this means is you never want to spend money you don't have. There are circumstances and situations where people say, well, you know what, I have a check coming in the next 2 weeks, let me go ahead and put it on the card, and then when I get paid, I'll just pay off the credit card, right? But what happens if the amount you're getting paid or the hours you get ends up being less than what you expect? Then you end up in a situation where you not only have to pay the principal, and mind you, principal is the amount owed, but then you have to pay the interest, the cost to borrow that money, and that becomes substantially more than what you have and what you could afford. And then that gets into a very sticky situation very quickly, especially if you put a large amount on the credit card. The second piece, do I want to use my savings? Now, under some circumstances, you wouldn't want to use your savings, like if it's locked in a CD or if it's locked in an investment and you're getting money on that. Sometimes the money that you're getting is more than the cost of the credit. So it benefits you to use the credit card, right? If you have it in a CD where it's locked in and you're going to get charged a fee for taking it out of that CD, then the credit card also makes more sense because the cost of using the credit card is substantially less than the cost of you taking out that money and paying for it. The third piece is, could I postpone the purchase? Now, if you have to decide between spending on a video game, right, or spending on medication that you need to stay healthy, sometimes postponing that video game is the better choice. In most cases, I would say that postponing the purchase of the video game is a better choice. Um, in some cases, you may not have that choice where you can't postpone that, like the example of medication. Um, but the reality is, if you use credit, right, and you're deciding to purchase something with a credit card, and you can't pay it right away and you get charged interest, what's going to happen is that's going to cause the cost of whatever you're purchasing to be substantially more than what it would have been if you had just paid it cash. So that is why you always have to consider, is this the right time to use credit before you go ahead and use the credit? So as we highlighted before in the video, they talk about the 3 C's of credit, which are character, capacity, and capital. In the book, they highlight 5 C's, but the 4th C that I want to talk about today, which I didn't put, is collateral. Okay, so just to go through it real quickly, character is based on who you are, your career, and what you do, right? Capacity is based on how well do you pay your bills and your debt, and when you do have it. And then capital is how much money you have and how much money you will have. Collateral is based on what are you using to purchase what are you using the credit to purchase. Um, for example, if you're taking out an auto loan, the loan is being used to purchase a car. The car is really the collateral that can be negotiated with if for whatever reason you can't pay the loan back. Meaning that if for God forbid you can't pay off the amount that you borrowed, then they could use the car to get back their money. They could sell that car and get their money back for the loan. And that is collateral. All these C's encompass what banks or financial institutions determine what you're eligible to borrow and at what cost. So when you build up these things, when you build your character, your capacity, and your capital, that allows you to negotiate better deals for yourself. Now, this doesn't only apply with the financial credit industry, but also professionally. If you have character, capacity, and capital, you have the experience capital or the knowledge capital to back up what you're saying. Credit or trust, which is the currency used to negotiate in any business deal, that's going to be given to you in large amounts. And that's going to be something you need to be able to negotiate what you want out of life as well. So a value that companies and financial institutions use to determine eligibility that's based on your credit history is called the FICO score. And now what's great about the FICO score is any person who's evaluating your credit history or your credit in general could go to the score and determine sort of like a snapshot what type of credit you have. An example would be when you're in a bank, sometimes when you're applying for a credit card, the banker or the person who is dealing with your accounts will ask you, well, what's your credit score? And you say, well, I have a credit score of 700. And they'll say, oh, well, usually customers who have that credit score get approved, and they get approved for this amount and for X% interest rate, right? So it's a really great way to kind of get a baseline for where you're at. Now, the bureaus that develop your credit score are Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. Now, these are the 3 major credit bureaus, and they also accumulate your credit history, your credit report, right? As someone who is a consumer and has to deal with these different bureaus, the government and the laws protect you. Some laws include the FCRA, which is the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And what's important about this is this holds the credit bureaus accountable for the information that they document about you. And if there's any document that is false and negatively impacts your credit report, you have the right to either sue or pursue legal action to correct these things if they don't correct it themselves. So if you look at this pie chart, right, some of the major pieces that encompass the FICO score are payment history, which is at 35%, and the amount owed, which is at 30%. So one thing to note is that this piece right here is actually not impacted by your student loans, right? Which is pretty strange because, I mean, so a major portion of debt today is student loans, but they don't encompass that part in the FICO score. As I imagine, it's probably because it's a necessary part of the development in our society, right? So some things to know about credit. There's two types of credit, right? There's the installment payments versus non-installment payments. Now, people might not consider bills as credit, but in most cases, the company provides the service and then you pay it after. And this is considered a non-installment payment. Installment payments, on the other hand, are chunks of the full amount owed that is separated throughout a certain time period that the person wants the payment done. So the time period of that loan would be considered a term. How long is what are the terms or conditions as far as how long do I have to repay you the money? APR is an acronym for annual percentage rate, and that's the rate that you're going to be charged per year for taking out the debt. Now, sometimes it gets confusing because let's say, for example, you take out a credit card and they charge you 24% APR. So your interest rate per month is actually that rate divided by 12. So if I could write it out here, right, 24% APR, right, is actually equal to 24 divided by 12, which is equal to 2% per month, right? And what I did here is I divided the annual percentage rate, the APR, by 12, which is how many months are in a year, and that gave me the monthly rate, right? But also you want to take a look at the conditions of the loans or the credit cards, because sometimes in the fine print they'll say that they charge per day. So if you want to get that rate, it would just be the interest rate, 24% annual percentage rate divided by 365, and that'll give you the rate per day, right? And that's pretty straightforward, right? And then the principal is the amount that you are borrowing, right? So what tends to get confusing is how much you owe at the end of the month or the end of the term. Because what tends to happen is if there's interest being charged on the loan, you owe the principal, what you borrowed, plus the interest that is accumulated. And interest, right, if that concept is hard to understand, like why would somebody pay to borrow money? Why can't I just give you the money that I borrowed back? Because there's a cost associated, a time value associated with the amount that you're borrowing, right? And what that means is if I give you $1 today, that is more valuable than $1 that I give you next week. And the reason is because the $1 I give you today, that's something that you could use right now and it's insured, versus $1 next week, there's no guarantee that you're going to get that $1. So that's why there's a time value associated with the money that you have. In fact, in some cases where you don't have the money at the moment, you're missing out on opportunity, and there's an opportunity cost that's also factored into interest. So let's go ahead and move into the next subject. So it's something to think about, right? Average student debt is at $30,000. And this is when you graduate a 4-year school. Average credit card debt in a household is about $16,000. So meaning that if a household has two people, a husband and a wife, right, then each person can have about $8,000. And so, after you graduate, if you get married, chances are you're probably going to have about $40,000 going into marriage if you just have a bachelor's degree, right? So these are things to think about. If you're at a point where you might be going over that amount, you might want to consider the different options that you have to pay for school. Going part-time, getting a second job, all these things to avoid having an insurmountable amount of debt that you have to pay. Of course, the other aspect of it is that by taking out the student debt and developing yourself with respect to education, once you come out, you can contribute to society, and you'll find a job or a career that'll help to pay off that debt. But the last thing you want to do is be in a position where you're vulnerable and compromised from your options, because again, financial independence and financial literacy is meant to give you the autonomy to be able to maneuver into whatever you want to do with freedom and an empowered sense, or with a sense of empowerment, versus somebody who has to do things because they have to pay bills, they have to pay debt, and they're obligated by other forces, coerced into doing something, right? Because the reality is, you could have all the money in the world, but if it's money that you owe back and you have to pay back, that doesn't give you the same autonomy as money that you have, that you've earned, that is your money, right? So take these things into account. There's people out there who are in these situations, that are in worse situations, and the last thing you want to do is be one of those people. Chapter 6 talks about research-based buying methods. And what's great about this is a method that I use personally to figure out what's the best approach to buying something, right? So just to go through it quickly, the first phase is identifying the problem and setting a goal. So kind of going to the root of the problem, let's say, for example, you need to find a form of transportation that's going to get you to your job and to school, right? So the goal is to find a way to cost effectively, to find a way that's cost effective to get to those places, right? So let's evaluate your choices. You could use public transportation, you could buy a moped, or you could buy a car. In the case of where we live, we have different environmental hazards and environmental factors that encapsulate what travel in the metropolitan really is. And using a moped and public transportation has its benefits because it is cost effective, but it's also unrealistic at times, especially when there's snow and I still have to get to work. You don't want to wait for a bus for an hour or even half an hour while you're exposed to the harshness of the environment. And that is something that has to be evaluated with respect to your choices. So then you go into phase 3, selection and purchase. You evaluate, maybe I could get a used car or a new car. Maybe I could consider using Zipcar or some service that allows me to rent a car for a low cost. And then you would go ahead and purchase. And then phase 4 is post-purchase activities, what's encapsulated in my purchase: insurance, gasoline, maintenance on the car. All these things are encompassed in a research-based approach. When would a research-based approach not be good? I would consider maybe sometimes you'd have to buy on impulse with respect to health. Sometimes you have situations where you have to buy medication or you're in an emergency room. You're not gonna say, oh, maybe there might be another option as far as helping me if I broke a leg or something like that. Sometimes you just have to take the bullet. You have to bite the bullet, and you have to bear down and make that purchase. But in most cases, you're using a research-based approach. So last but not least, I wanted to talk about the update on the extra credit. So right now, looking at how I'm performing in the past month, I've lost about 9% on my investments, which is it's bad. The market, a lot of people are losing out. If you check out the S&P 500, they've lost about, I think it is 3.4%. So everybody's losing. This is what you call systemic risk, right? Because the reality is it's unavoidable. Everybody's losing out. I mean, there's some stocks. I think I was looking at marijuana stock. Apparently, it's still on the rise, but in most cases, everybody's losing money. So, that's part of it. So, I mean, you could see here on the last half of the investment that I kind of just held out, and I'm not really buying or selling, right? But even so, the idea is to get an understanding and learn about what's going on. This isn't, again, as you can see, it's a small amount. This isn't the only investment I have. I have other investments, and I've lost on those investments too, right? And they're all managed. And then on the other side, the larger investment that I have is fairly conservative. I have it in a savings account that has a low return, about 2%. But based on how I have everything allocated, there's a term that I want to introduce you guys to, and that's diversification, right? And diversification does not ensure that I gain money or that I lose, or it doesn't guarantee that I'm not going to lose money. But because I diversified, I am protected and I have the ability to learn, right? Because diversification is a lesson, right? So what does diversification mean? Diversification is the process of putting your assets in different aspects or different investments. And why a person would do that? By putting in an investment that might gain 5% and putting in an investment that at the same time loses 3%. Not only does the gain on the one side protect me from what I've lost, but it allows me to see what are the best options, right? Then when I'm ready to take the risk, then I could put all my assets or a good portion of my assets in something that I think is going to give me a good return, right? So what this is supposed to do really is to expose you to the idea of investing and taking risks in life, because there's no way that you could earn or gain anything by simply sitting on the sideline and watching. You have to get out there and do it. You have to put money in the market to figure out what's going on, because if you just sit back and just let life pass you by, you're never going to get anywhere. Sure, I lost about $330 this month on investments, but at the same time, the larger investment got me $500, so I ended up winning anyways. But again, if you don't put yourself out there, that's never going to happen for you. So with that being said, I also want to introduce another application that allows you to invest. This is called M1. If you look it up, it allows you to invest in ETFs. And then now what ETFs are they are instruments that imitate some of the other stocks and mutual funds performance. So they allow you to invest in those items or things that perform similarly to those items without having to put the actual cost. So what this means is if you want to invest in Apple stock but don't have $90 on hand, you could still invest in Apple stock through an ETF. If you want to invest in the S&P 500 or another mutual fund, you're able to do that. If you see here, I have about $500 invested. I already lost about 30 bucks because, like I told you, there's so much systemic risk. Everybody's losing. But I was able to invest in some blockchain mutual funds without having to put up an exorbitant amount of money. And what's great about this is it allows me to adjust the portfolio to the way that I want to. So this is a good tool to try out some things if you want to experiment. I put up 500. You could probably put up more. You could put up less. I'd review it to see and read the fine print to make sure that the cost isn't exorbitant. But again, if you're looking to get your feet wet, you have to get out there. You have to put some money out there. You got to figure it out. This one's a bit more expensive than the other one, but than Robinhood. But again, this is it's your education. It's your money. Go out and figure out how to use it. All right, man? So this is Professor Suarez. Again, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to contact me. And I am signing out. Thank you so much for your time and take care.